You can feel it in your chest before you can name it. The sense that something ancient has been whispering to you while the world shouts over it. A soft bell under traffic noise. A careful hand on your shoulder when your impulses race ahead. A voice that does not argue, yet refuses to be ignored. Tonight, I want you to lean toward that voice. Not because you should be afraid, but because you are finally ready to be guided. Not because you have failed, but because you are wise enough to ask why shortcuts keep leaving you farther from yourself, why noise keeps passing for counsel, why words spoken in heat keep burning what you love, why pleasure without boundaries keeps emptying you, and why your busiest days keep producing emptier barns. This is a warning, yes, but it is also a welcome. An open gate into a quieter field where old wisdom still knows your name. I see the pressure you have carried, the invisible timelines you never agreed to, the nights when your thoughts would not land because your body could not believe you were safe enough to rest. You have been told to move faster, buy faster, decide faster, speak faster, and even heal faster, as if your soul were a device that only needed a software update. You are not a device. You are a person with a story that deserves gentleness. The ache you feel is not proof that you are broken. It is proof that you are awake and that your conscience still remembers the difference between a sweet coating and true nourishment. If you have stumbled, you are in good company. If you have ignored a warning, you are in human company. And if you are listening now, you are already on better ground than you were yesterday. Solomon spoke into a world as noisy as ours, trading floors and city gates and crowded rooms where confidence passed for wisdom and charisma for character. Yet he did not shout. He laid out patterns like a careful architect, reminding us that life is built beam by beam, and collapse is usually slow before it is sudden. He did not give slogans. He gave diagrams, weights and measures, seasons and boundaries, counsel and restraint, so that ordinary people under ordinary pressure could still build extraordinary lives. His words are not museum pieces. They are tools still warm from use, and when we pick them up, our choices start to fit together with a clean click. You do not need a new identity to begin. You need a truer map, and that is what this time is for. There is a reason your body responds to certain choices before your mind explains them. Neuroscience tells us the brain runs on signals of threat and reward. When fear surges, the amygdala fires first, narrowing your options, and when a quick prize flashes, dopamine promises relief before wisdom can speak. This is not your failure. This is your wiring asking for leadership. When you slow your breath, label what you feel, and invite counsel into a decision, you give your prefrontal cortex room to steady the wheel, and your nervous system stops confusing urgency with importance. Spiritual wisdom has said this for centuries in the simplest way. Guard your heart, train your tongue, weigh your motives, choose your companions, honor the season. The science is merely catching up to the soul. So we will walk with Solomon's warnings like 5 lanterns in a dark corridor. Not to shame you, but to help you see the edges before you bruise them again. You will notice the glitter of the shortcut and learn why fast gain so often becomes slow ruin. You will notice how pride dresses up as self-sufficiency and why isolation makes smart people blind. You will notice the dangerous ease of an unguarded tongue and how words can plant futures or salt the soil. You will notice how desire without structure turns sweet things into poison. And you will notice how frantic motion can feel like strength while your real work sits unwatered at the edges of your life. We will not hurry these lessons. We will turn them in our hands like tools, feeling their weight, understanding their use, practicing their grip. As you listen, let symbols guide you, because images slip past your defenses and speak directly to your body. Picture the scales that look even but are not, the city gates where elders gather in patient conversation, the sword that cuts where a balm could have healed, the honey that nourishes when in season and sickens when not, and the wall that keeps a vineyard safe because someone cared enough to repair it stone by stone. Keep these near you like touchstones. Let them interrupt your next impulse, your next argument, your next late-night scroll, and your next self-justification. When the image rises, breathe once, name what is happening, and choose the wiser path, even if it is slower, even if it is quieter, even if no one applauds. If part of you is bracing for judgment, release that now. We are not here to rehearse your worst moments or rehearse your best excuses. We are here to recover your agency, to give your conscience words that are both kind and strong, and to help your body feel the relief of a choice that does not need to be hidden. Mercy and clarity can live in the same room, and tonight they will. The goal is not perfection. The goal is direction, a path that can be walked with honest feet and a pace you can sustain. Slow is not punishment. Slow is protection. Counsel is not weakness. Counsel is leverage. Boundaries are not cold. Boundaries are love's architecture. Before we enter the first warning, pause with me. Let the shoulders drop and the breath deepen. 3 slower inhales and 3 slower exhales, reminding your nervous system that you are allowed to learn without fear. Whisper to yourself, if it helps, that you are not late and you are not disqualified. You are simply ready. Ready to trade the sugar of hurry for the strength of patience, the loneliness of pride for the safety of counsel, the thrill of venting for the craft of healing speech, the blur of unchecked appetite for the joy of measured delight, and the heavy drag of busyness for the quiet power of focus. This is a sober joy, the kind that does not spike and crash, the kind that lasts because it is built. When the harvest comes, and it always comes, you will want your field to tell a different story than the one haste has been writing. Let us begin where many fall, at the edge of the shortcut that promises relief without roots. Breathe once more, feel your feet, remember the scales, and step with me onto the steadier path. There is a shine that appears in the mind before the hand even moves, a glitter that promises relief without roots, a sweeter breath that lifts the chest as if a narrow bridge has suddenly become a highway. The shortcut smiles. It sounds like kindness. It tastes like mercy. It eases the ache of waiting and claims to spare you from the long road that honest work requires. Yet the ancient voice stands beside that glow and speaks with quiet certainty that bread stolen in haste turns to gravel in the mouth, that sweet without season carries a cost that arrives late and asks for interest taken from the heart. The warning is not a threat. The warning is a light that reveals where the path narrows and where a step toward speed becomes a slip toward loss. The body recognizes the shortcut before the mind argues for it. A quick offer arrives and the pulse jumps. The eyes widen slightly. Breathing lifts and tightens. The brain tastes reward as if it were already earned, and the deeper parts of the nervous system count relief as proof. This is how living tissue responds to promise. This is how a weary story reaches for a faster ending. Nothing in that response makes you weak or shallow. It makes you human. It is why the shortcut is so persuasive when time feels thin and pressure feels heavy. The lure is not only in the offer. The lure is in the relief that the offer seems to deliver. Yet there is a difference between relief and restoration. Relief can arrive like a spark and vanish with smoke. Restoration settles like rain and sinks into the ground. The wise path refuses to be rushed because it is building more than an outcome. It is building a person who can carry that outcome without collapsing. This is why the ancient sayings return again and again to true weights and honest measures, to fields tended through seasons, to plans made with steady hands. Compounding trust is slow to rise, but hard to knock down. The sprint feels like flight, yet leaves the legs shaking. The long walk trains the bones and the breath. At the center of the shortcut sits a scale that is tilted in your favor. It is only a hair's width, only enough to get past this tight month, only enough to qualify for something just out of reach, only enough to make the story you tell yourself feel a little less heavy. That hair's width becomes habit, and habit becomes identity, and identity turns small choices into grooves that are hard to climb out of. The conscious conscience does not hate you for this. The conscience tries to protect you. It murmurs that a small lie rarely stays small, that unearned gains leak through the seams of a life, that easy victories develop a taste for more. When the scale is true, it may give less in the moment, but it gives rest. When the scale is crooked, it gives more in the moment, but it takes sleep. Many who reach for the shortcut are not greedy. They are tired. They have felt invisible while others seem to float forward on unseen currents. They carry the weight of family and expectation and the silent fear of being left behind. Shame turns patience into a kind of humiliation and whispers that slow means foolish. The shortcut answers that whisper with a counterfeit blessing. It offers momentum without maturity. It offers outcomes without the inner strength to hold them. The cost does not appear on any invoice. The cost shows up as self-respect that erodes, as relationships that feel slightly dirtier than they did yesterday, as a sense of being out of sync with your own values. The mind tries to bargain with that cost. It says that this is temporary, that you will go back to the straight path after this deadline, after this quarter, after this move. It says that everyone trims the truth a little and that survival demands it. The body hears that bargain and refuses to relax. The shoulders stay high. The stomach stays tight. Sleep comes late and leaves early. The nervous system does not believe the bargain because the nervous system knows when a boundary has been moved. It signals through tension and through fatigue. It asks for alignment the way a misfitted door asks for a carpenter. The science of emotion names the signals. The wisdom of the soul names the deficit. Integrity was forfeited for speed. There is also a quiet danger that hides inside talent. When you are gifted, shortcuts feel less like cheating and more like creative problem solving. A clever mind can turn a tilted scale into a strategy and dress compromise in excellent language. The crowd often claps. The results sometimes look brilliant. Yet underneath the applause, the foundation does not thicken. It thins. Character is what remains when no one is watching. A house built on spectacle can stand for a season, but it shakes when the wind rises, and the wind always rises. The older voice does not mock talent. It insists on structure, and structure saves talent from devouring itself. Picture a merchant who discovers that shaving a measure gives him an advantage that no competitor can match. Customers praise his speed and his price, and he learns to enjoy the thrill of staying just ahead. Profit becomes a game. Each day asks whether the next shave can be a little finer without being seen. He believes that the glow in his chest is confidence, but in the quiet hours, the glow flickers into worry. He knows too much about the corners he cut, and he knows too little about how to stop cutting them. When a dispute comes, he carries no solid ground to stand on, because the ground beneath him has been slowly scraped away by his own hand. Now picture the same merchant using true weights. The returns arrive slowly, and sometimes feel ordinary. No one throws parades for ordinary. But his sleep is deeper and his steps are steadier. Suppliers trust him. Partners speak his name with warmth rather than caution. Customers tell their friends without being asked. When a storm comes, they stay. When a delay happens, they forgive. The foundation holds. He still experiences fear and temptation. He also experiences peace that does not depend on the speed of the weak. The difference cannot be seen in a single day. The difference can be felt in the soul that is not divided against itself. Every shortcut hides a false story about time. It says that the future can be stolen from and will not notice. It says that harvest can be demanded without sowing. It says that character can be purchased on credit and paid for later when things are easier. Time does not work that way. Time remembers. Time gathers every seed. Time hears every promise the mouth makes to the heart. The ancient wisdom calls this justice. Modern language might call it feedback. Either way, the pattern is unbreakable. What is built with patience contains patience. What is built with deceit contains fear. Fear rattles the frame forever. There is also a false story about identity. The shortcut says that you are only as safe as your last win, that without constant proof you are nothing, that love and value are prizes to be chased rather than gifts to be received and stewarded. This story forces the body to run even when the race is over, forces the voice to sell even when there is nothing left to sell, forces the heart to make vows it cannot keep. The wiser story says that dignity precedes achievement, that the person you bring to the task matters as much as the task itself, that goodness is not a delay, but a design. The calmer you become inside this story, the less magic the shortcut holds. The old saying about steady hands and steady wealth is not a slogan. It is a nervous system strategy and a spiritual alignment. When the inner world is taught to breathe through scarcity, urgency loses its power to bully the next choice. When the soul is taught to value clean gain over fast gain, shame loses its power to govern the next risk. The promise of the shortcut grows dim because it no longer speaks to a panic that has been soothed. The felt sense of worth changes what the eyes call opportunity. What once looked like a rescue now looks like a trap with fine stitching. There are moments when delay is not a denial but a safeguard. There are moments when the quieter path appears almost invisible, and yet it holds treasures the louder road cannot offer. Quiet choices do not look heroic. They prevent disasters that never make headlines. They anchor relationships that weather seasons. They allow a person to arrive at success without being a stranger to themselves. That is the secret the shortcut never mentions. It promises a destination. It cannot promise a you who is whole when you get there. The warning that began this chapter carries no contempt. It carries care. It calls to the part of you that already knew the difference between a thrill and a foundation. It speaks to the memory of times when you chose the longer path and discovered that the gain did not merely land in your hands. It landed in your character. The ancient words about true weights and honest measures remain tender because they aim at your freedom. Freedom from the chase. Freedom from the story that says you must pay for your place with a piece of your integrity. Freedom from the sleepless bargain that always asks for more. The seduction of the shortcut fades when truth grows louder than urgency. The path forward may still be narrow, and it may still be slow, yet the ground beneath it is good. Ahead waits the wisdom of counsel and the safety that comes when multiple eyes see what a single mind can miss. Before reaching that gate, let the image of the scale settle in your imagination. Let it be a steady companion, a quiet reminder that every measure you make is also making you. There is a moment when confidence hardens into armor, and armor quietly becomes a cage. It begins with a simple thought that says the fewer voices, the fewer doubts. The fewer doubts, the cleaner the path. The heart enjoys the lift that comes from deciding alone, a private spark that feels like strength. Yet beneath that glow, a quieter awareness speaks. Pride narrows vision. Solitude distorts distance. What looks like clarity may be a hallway of mirrors, each reflection nodding back because it is made of the same face. The ancient wisdom warns that the lone path often turns into a hidden cliff, not because intelligence is small, but because blind spots are real. Not because courage is lacking, but because wisdom grows in conversation. You have carried decisions that few people see. You have signed your name when the outcome still trembled. You have kept others safe and kept your fears quiet. In that load, a subtle belief can grow. If I stop to listen, I will lose momentum. If I ask for help, I will lose authority. If I admit uncertainty, people will lose faith. The body hears this story and tightens to match it. The jaw sets, the breath climbs, sleep becomes thin. The mind tries to run every scenario inside a closed loop. The loop shrinks until only one voice fills the room. That voice is your own. It sounds firm. It is also alone. There is a difference between solitude that heals and isolation that hollows. Solitude is a meadow that restores your courage. Isolation is a corridor that shortens your judgment. In solitude, the soul settles and the thinking centers. In isolation, the same thoughts circle with increasing volume. Neuroscience describes this as the mind favoring information that confirms what it already believes. The older wisdom described it in simpler terms. A person can be right in their own eyes and wrong in the light of shared counsel. Many eyes see what one mind misses. Many stories rescue a single story from becoming a tunnel. Consider how the body shifts in the presence of trusted counsel. Shoulders lower, breath deepens. The nervous system reads safety in steady tone and careful questions. As safety rises, curiosity returns, and with curiosity comes a broader map. Options appear that urgency had blurred. Consequences become clearer than desires. You are not being controlled by counsel. You are being enlarged by it. The decision remains yours, but the room in which you decide grows wider and kinder. This is why the image of city gates carries such power. At the gates, elders gathered not to parade authority, but to let wisdom live in many angles at once. Self-sufficiency feels efficient, but efficiency without perspective, emptying its pride, becomes expensive. A misread hire, a move made on impulse, a silence held when a repair needed words. None of these feel like pride in the moment. They feel like focus. They feel like protecting your role. Only later do the edges show. The fix takes longer than the pause would have taken. The fallout costs more than the conversation would have cost. Pride saves minutes and spends months. Counsel spends minutes and saves seasons. The math is not only financial, it is emotional, it is relational, it is spiritual. The inner story that resists counsel often began as a wound. Somewhere a voice mocked your questions. Somewhere a room punished your uncertainty. Somewhere a promise to yourself hardened. Never again, never need, never ask. That vow once kept you safe. Now it keeps you small. When counsel approaches, the body does not meet a friend. It meets an old fear wearing a new face. The first impulse is to guard, to explain, to dismiss. That impulse is understandable. It is also outdated. You are standing in a different season with different tools. What protected you yesterday may be constraining you today. Pride also enjoys the theater of certainty. It feels good to present a firm jaw and an unbroken sentence. It draws applause. It reduces the discomfort of ambiguity. Yet the same theater empties the craft of decision-making. Real wisdom can say, "I do not yet know." Real wisdom can say, "I was wrong." Real wisdom can say, "Teach me what I cannot see." These words do not drain authority. They root authority in truth. They invite reality to speak back. When reality is welcomed, course corrections happen early and gently rather than late and violently. There is a science to good counsel. Bias meets balance. Memory meets fresh eyes. Emotion meets language that names it without shaming it. The brain loves patterns and sometimes worships them, repeating a strategy long after its season has changed. Counsel interrupts that worship and asks whether the pattern still serves the purpose. This pause is not weakness. This pause is the maintenance that keeps a foundation from cracking. In the quiet of such conversations, the nervous system learns that safety and honesty can share the same table. Decisions made in that climate hold up when pressure returns. Imagine a leader standing at the gates with a question heavy in the chest, not a performance, a real question. Around the table sit people with different gifts and different scars. One sees risk the leader cannot see. One sees opportunity the leader cannot name. One remembers a similar crossroads from another year. The leader listens, not for validation, but for clarity. In that gathering, the burden redistributes. The leader remains responsible, yet no longer carries the illusion of omniscience. The outcome may still be imperfect. The path may still bend. The difference is this: pride does not own the wheel. Wisdom does. When counsel becomes a rhythm rather than an emergency measure, humility stops feeling like humiliation. It feels like design. It feels like a well-tended garden where many hands remove stones and draw lines for water to flow. The harvest does not belong to any single hand. It belongs to the shared labor of watchfulness. The heart learns to prefer this safety to the brittle relief of solitary certainty. Trust accumulates. Teams breathe easier. Families relax. The person at the center can finally rest inside their role because their role is supported rather than defended. The warning about pride is not a scolding. It is a hand on the shoulder that protects you from walking into a glass door you did not see. It says you are strong enough to welcome help. It says your gift deserves the guardrails that keep it from running off the road. It says wisdom does not shrink your voice. Wisdom tunes your voice so that it carries without strain. In that tuning, the next decisions begin to sound different. Less rush, more resonance, less theater, more truth. The gate stands open in this image for a reason. Counsel is not a courtroom. It is a threshold. You cross it and return, cross it and return, each time carrying a clearer map. That map honors your experience and expands it. That is how pride softens without being shamed. That is how self-sufficiency becomes mature strength rather than brittle control. Many eyes, many angles. One heart that stays honest enough to receive them. What follows will ask for the same honesty in a different arena. Words. The next danger wears a familiar face and a warm breath. It hides in sentences that escape too quickly and leave frost behind. Before we meet it, allow the image of the gates to rest in your imagination. Not a wall that blocks you, a place where wisdom gathers and your burden becomes lighter because it is shared. There is a heat that gathers behind the teeth before a sentence is born, a quick flare in the chest that feels like pressure opening a gate. In that instant, the tongue becomes a blade or a balm. The body knows this moment better than the mind does. Shoulders lift, breath shortens. The face tightens by a fraction. The nervous system prepares for battle as if a threat were entering the room. The next sound carries power far beyond the sound itself. It can knit or split, plant or scorch, gather or scatter. Ancient wisdom has always treated speech like architecture. A house goes up board by board, and a life goes up word by word. Venting often masquerades as honesty. It promises relief that lands like steam thrown from a kettle. Pressure drops for the speaker, while pressure rises for the listener who now carries heat they did not create. Honesty tells the truth with a purpose that heals. Venting throws truth and half-truth together and calls the mixture brave. The brain rewards the rush with a bright pulse that feels righteous, yet once the rush fades, a quieter cost remains. The room feels colder, trust thins by a shade. The bridge between two hearts loses a plank that no one names. Language is never only language. It is atmosphere. It is climate. Teams breathe it the way lungs breathe air. Homes absorb it the way earth absorbs rain. Words spoken under pressure teach the body what to expect next time pressure rises. If the words cut, the body learns to brace. If the words soothe without denying the truth, the body learns to stay present. Neuroscience speaks of neural pathways and emotional memory. Wisdom speaks of life and death in the power of the tongue. Both describe one law. Repeated speech carves grooves in the soul that the future will follow. An unguarded mouth often travels with a guarded heart. The more fragile the inner world, the sharper the outer sentences. Sarcasm becomes armor. Mockery becomes distance. Precision becomes control. All of it feels like safety in the moment, and all of it becomes isolation over time. The person who uses words like a whip rarely plans to wound. They plan to not be wounded. Yet wounds do not disappear when transferred. They multiply. The tongue that lashes today must explain tomorrow why trust looks away. There is a different strength that stands very still inside the same pressure. This strength does not deny anger. It gives anger a right shape. It does not erase grief. It gives grief a true name. It does not pretend there is no conflict. It speaks to the conflict without turning the person into the enemy. Such speech feels quiet while it is spoken and powerful after it lands. It builds room for repair. It builds room for responsibility. It builds room for hope that is honest about harm. When that pattern repeats, even adversaries begin to understand that dignity will be protected here. Some insist that many words prove passion and seriousness. The older wisdom smiles at that belief and calls it costly. Where words are many, errors multiply. The tongue tries to fill silence that would have calmed an inflamed room. The mouth tries to solve problems that needed listening more than solving. The brain races to produce the next point and forgets that connection is usually born in the pause. Fewer words would have carried more weight. Simpler words would have traveled further. Silence would have done the work of mercy that an extra paragraph could not do. Consider the day when a sentence saved a partnership because it was tempered in time. A hard truth was named without humiliation. A boundary was drawn without contempt. An apology was offered without theatrics. Nothing glittered. Everything strengthened. The reward did not look like triumph. It looked like a steady hand extended across a table and taken without flinch. No one saw the neurons that rewired as safety rose. No one heard the inner noise quiet as the nervous system recognized a place where conflict does not equal danger. The sharpest tongues often belong to those who care the most. Love burns hot and refuses to watch a good thing decay. But love that speaks without wisdom tries to save the house by burning the furniture. The room empties. The echoes remain. The same love, guided by restraint, becomes a skilled builder. It learns the difference between a sentence that wins the moment and a sentence that wins the year. It learns to choose phrases that leave dignity intact, even when accountability is clear. It learns to remove the poison of accusation while keeping the medicine of truth. There is an inner practice that need not be announced to anyone. The heart notices the rise of heat and registers it like a wave that can be surfed rather than a riptide that must be escaped. Breath spreads lower. Shoulders release a fraction. The mind names the emotion without letting the emotion hold the microphone. This is not performance. This is stewardship. The sentence that follows carries weight because it is no longer a discharge. It is a planting. Seeds prefer patience to force. Futures grow better under patient weather. The old image still guides. A sword cuts fast and proves something in the moment. A balm works slow and proves something in the days that follow. Cutting gives a feeling of control that fades into regret or denial. Healing gives a feeling of steadiness that deepens into trust. There are seasons when boundaries must be clear and firm. There are seasons when silence must not be confused with safety. Even then, the manner of speech can carry the character of the speaker. Firm does not require cruel. Clear does not require crushing. Truth does not require spectacle. Memory keeps a ledger of speech. Not a legal ledger that condemns, but a living ledger that predicts. Those who use words to humiliate will be avoided when wisdom is needed most. Those who use words to protect dignity will be sought when pressure returns. Over time, this becomes the quiet economy of influence. Power built on volume declines. Power built on credibility compounds. It is slow, like all compounding things, and it is strong, like all things built with care. There is a tenderness in this warning that refuses shame. It recognizes how many sentences were learned in rooms where fear ruled the table. It recognizes how many harsh phrases were inherited from voices that did not know another way. The goal is not to rewrite the past. The goal is to become trustworthy in the present. Through steady practice, the mouth can become an instrument of repair. Through steady honesty, the tongue can learn the weight of silence and the craft of clean speech. The field begins to green where salt once lay. The path ahead will move from words to desire, from the mouth to the appetite that lives below the words. Pleasure without boundaries wears a charming face and carries hidden ruin in its pocket. Before we meet that charm, let this truth rest gently. Every sentence builds something, and the builder remains inside the room they have made. Choose speech that you would want to live inside when the wind begins to rise. Desire arrives with a gentle warmth that spreads through the chest and softens the edges of a hard day. It speaks in a friendly voice and promises rest without cost, sweetness without consequence, escape without memory. At first it feels like kindness wearing perfume. The body leans toward the pleasant, and the mind follows a half step behind. eager to call this relief a blessing. Yet ancient wisdom keeps returning with a patient countersong. Joy without season sickens. Sweetness without measure turns bitter. What begins as balm can become a bruise when it no longer knows its limits. There is a secret fatigue that makes boundaryless pleasure so persuasive. The heart that has carried too much for too long begins to bargain with itself. I have earned this. I deserve this. I cannot keep going without this. The nervous system, starved for relief, lights up at the first taste and then asks for more in a pattern as old as hunger. Dopamine sketches a bright path that points always toward the next hit and never toward the root. It feels like living, yet the hours afterward feel hollow, and the hollowness asks for another round. A loop is born, and loops are loyal, even when they are unkind. Unbounded indulgence does not announce itself as destruction. It moves in quietly and rearranges the furniture of the soul. Sleep grows thin, focus loses depth, promises begin to wobble. The face still smiles, but something is dimmer behind the eyes. The cost is often paid in private with coins called secrecy and self-respect. The habit that once felt like freedom begins to demand secrecy to survive, and secrecy steals air from the lungs. The person remains lovable and capable. The person also feels less whole than they did yesterday. That ache is not proof of moral failure. It is proof that your inner compass is still awake. There is a tenderness in the way the old sayings treat desire. They do not shame appetite. They place it inside season and covenant, inside order and meaning. Honey is praised when it is gathered in season, because sweetness has a proper time and a proper portion. Outside those lines, the same honey makes the stomach turn. The image is simple enough for a child and deep enough for a weary adult. When the sweetness is measured, joy expands. When the sweetness is unmeasured, joy shrinks, even as the flavor intensifies. The tongue is thrilled while the heart grows thin. Unchecked pleasure also distorts perception. It edits memory so that only the high remains in focus and the crash fades to fog. It frames boundaries as enemies and paints watchfulness as punishment. The mind becomes an excellent defense attorney for the habit that empties it. Words like balance and covenant and limit are recast as threats to authentic living. Yet the soul is an ecosystem, not a stage. Ecosystems thrive on rhythm and restraint, on growth and pruning, on feasting and fasting, on work that gives the feast a context. When rhythm is broken, the soil dries and the fruit loses its sweetness long before it falls. There is a deep connection between pleasure and meaning that often goes unnoticed. Pleasure without meaning cannot hold weight. It collapses under the demand to make life feel good forever. Meaning without pleasure forgets that the body is a sacred companion and not a mule. Wisdom refuses the split. It marries delight to purpose so that the body feels cherished and the spirit feels anchored. In that marriage, limits are not walls that imprison. Limits become trellises that train the vine so that grapes are reachable and protected. The wine that comes from such a vine has a clarity that quick sugar cannot imitate. Emotional neuroscience offers a kind way of naming this pattern. The reward system fires faster than the reflective system when cues for pleasure appear. Under chronic stress, the faster system gains more influence. The path forward begins when safety returns to the body, and the reflective system is invited back to the table, not through shame, through steadiness. The ancient path said the same in another tongue: walk with companions, keep watch over your heart, honor the season, measure the sweetness. None of this kills joy. It protects joy from becoming a tyrant. Shame cannot heal indulgence because shame breeds secrecy, and secrecy feeds the very habit it condemns. Compassion also cannot heal indulgence if compassion becomes permission to avoid truth. The healing climate blends warmth with clarity, dignity with honesty. It says, your appetite is not your enemy, your body is not your enemy, your longing for comfort is not your enemy. The enemy is the lie that relief without order will give you the wholeness you miss. Wholeness is assembled slowly by choices that match your values, even when your cravings argue otherwise. The feeling of integrity returns, and the cravings grow quieter because there is less pain to medicate. Relationships feel the difference before anyone names it. Pleasure without boundaries makes promises it cannot keep, and then blames the hearer for hoping. Trust thins at first by threads, and then by ropes. Laughter still arrives, but it lands on a floor that creaks. Lovers become supervisors, friends become auditors, the room loses its lightness. When desire is honored inside covenant, the opposite story appears. Eyes soften, play returns, energy replenishes rather than drains. Secrets lose their shine because no secret is required to keep joy alive. The room brightens in a way that no performance can counterfeit. Work and calling feel the ripples as well. Unbounded indulgence steals focus from the hours that build a future. Ideas lose their edges. Discipline becomes a stranger. Small delays turn into missed seasons. The loss is not only in productivity, the loss is in identity. The person who once trusted their own word now hesitates to believe themselves. When boundaries return, the same person feels their name settle back into their chest. The mind can be trusted again. The hands can be trusted again. The calendar becomes a friend rather than a judge. There is a soft grief that accompanies recovery from unmeasured pleasure. It mourns time spent in bright rooms that left the soul thirsty. It mourns the laughter that hid fatigue. It mourns moments that could have ripened if they had been held with honor. That grief is not a pit, it is a rite of passage. It marks the movement from thrill to joy, from appetite as driver to appetite as honored passenger, from craving as compass to meaning as map. On the far side of such grief, desire becomes clean again. The same honey tastes sweeter because it is eaten with gratitude rather than urgency. The warning held inside this chapter does not aim to erase the colors of life. It aims to return their true shade. Pleasure that honors season feels like sunlight that warms rather than burns. Boundaries shaped by love feel like a hand at the small of the back, guiding without force. Order becomes a shelter where celebration is safe. From that shelter, the next hazard can be seen more clearly, the one that wears the costume of productivity while draining the harvest in silence. Haste and distraction wait just beyond the threshold, busy and unfruitful, loud and empty, promising everything and finishing very little. There is a way of moving that looks like strength and feels like erosion, a blur that keeps the hands occupied while the harvest shrinks at the edges. Haste wears the clothes of urgency and asks to be praised. Distraction smiles like variety and asks to be forgiven. Together they create a day that hums with motion and ends with a question that the body asks before the mouth can form it. What did I actually build? The ache that follows is not only physical, it is moral and spiritual. The sense that effort has been poured into a sieve and that attention has been scattered like seed thrown on a road. Under pressure, the mind narrows its focus to what screams the loudest. The older parts of the brain mark every ping as possible threat and every novelty as possible reward. The result is a carousel that feels like progress because it is spinning. Task gives way to task. Window gives way to window. The nervous system never lands long enough for depth to take root. The prefrontal regions that steward planning and judgment begin to tire. Memory frays. Patience thins. Confidence drains, not because capacity is small, but because attention has been spent in fragments that cannot knit. Haste often hides a deeper sorrow. It offers relief from facing the field that needs patient tending, the conversation that needs tenderness, the craft that needs quiet. A full calendar makes an excellent disguise for avoidance. The heart knows this and protests in small ways, a sigh that lingers, eyes that skip lines, a mind that loses the thread. These are not proofs of weakness. They are indicators that the pace has drifted away from wisdom, that speed has become a costume for fear, that the soul is asking to be reclaimed from the noise. Distraction promises variety and delivers dilution. It interrupts before momentum can form, and then it interrupts the interruption. The brain learns to expect the next switch and begins to withhold full engagement from the current task. Nothing receives the weight of full presence, and without full presence, even gifted people produce thinner work. Joy fades from the craft because joy prefers immersion to skimming. Relationships feel the same thinning. Listening becomes partial. Laughter becomes a filler rather than a bond. The room remains loud while connection grows faint. There is a gentler rhythm that does not flatter the ego with busyness, yet fills the hands with fruit. It gathers attention like water in a clean vessel and pours it where it matters most. It accepts that not everything can be done and that this is not failure, but fidelity. It understands that excellence grows in stretches of steady focus and that scattered effort rarely composes anything worth keeping. This rhythm is not glamorous, it is trustworthy. It rebuilds confidence because the body can finally feel completion, and completion teaches the soul that it is capable of finishing what it begins. Ancient wisdom carried this rhythm in simple images. A field slowly tended, a wall quietly repaired, an ant moving small loads with quiet consistency. None of these look impressive from a distance. Up close they are beautiful because they honor design. Fields do not flourish under anxiety. Walls do not mend under hurry. Small loads moved in faithful sequence outlast. Heavy loads moved in fits and bursts. The lesson is not punitive, it is merciful. It returns dignity to work by reuniting action with meaning and by allowing energy to flow in lines that hold. Neglect rarely announces itself with a crash. It creeps, weeds at the margins, stones out of place, gates that sag. The creeping becomes a mood in the house and a tone in the team. Opportunities slip because no one saw them long enough to say yes. Dollars drip through unnoticed cracks. Trust thins as promises move from almost done to almost done again. None of this is dramatic. All of it is expensive. The expense is paid in focus that never returns, and in seasons that pass without harvest because the soil was never given time to drink. There is a bodily intelligence that recognizes true pace when it finally appears. Muscles soften, breath drops lower, eyes find one thing and stay. The mind remembers how to enter a task the way a swimmer enters water and remains there until the shoreline comes. In this climate, the reflective parts of the brain come back online, offering perspective that stress had locked away. Creativity returns not as fireworks, but as clarity. The work grows clean edges. The hours grow a satisfying weight. The person at the center feels less divided and more whole. Haste also confuses identity. It whispers that worth is measured in how much can be squeezed into an afternoon, that value arrives only when the checklist is emptied and refilled. This story makes rest feel like failure and attention feel like disloyalty to the rules of the grind. The wiser story says that worth is carried into the work rather than earned by the work, that presence is not indulgence but power, that a completed task done in alignment outvalues a dozen fragments done in panic. This story quiets the compulsion to prove and frees the energy to build. Some will say that the world rewards speed and constant availability. Sometimes it does, for a while. Then the invoice arrives. Mistakes that a single moment of stillness would have prevented. Apologies that consume time, which focus would have saved. Rework that empties the joy of making. The hidden tax of haste is paid in double, once in the quality of the outcome and once in the erosion of the person who produced it. The hidden gift of focus is paid forward, as clean work creates less friction for everyone it touches. The warning about haste and distraction is tender because it understands the fear beneath the rush. No one wants to be left behind. No one wants to be seen as slow, yet the race that matters is often shorter than the sprint and longer than the panic. It is the steady crossing of a distance that fits the soul you have, the call you carry, the people you love. It leaves room for counsel and room for rest. It leaves margins where beauty can grow. It leaves the gate standing and the wall standing and the field greening in due season. At the edge of this chapter, a picture lingers. A plot once ignored, now cleared. Stones lifted, vines trained. A wall that looked tired, now set again. The change is not theatrical, it is evident. The ground holds. The harvest is possible. The heart can hear itself again. From here, the story will gather into one thread, a simple tale where symbols speak and a life turns by listening to what they say. A merchant woke before dawn to the soft blue of morning and the familiar ache of needing more. On his table lay two scales. One was honest and heavy, the other looked the same but leaned a breath toward his profit. He told himself it was only for now. He told himself it was for the sake of those he loved. The tilted scale glowed with an easy promise, and the honest one sat quiet, like a faithful friend who refuses to flatter. He reached for the glow and felt the first thrill of quick advantage slide through his chest like warm air. Each day the coins rang brighter when the lien was small, and the city praised his speed, his price, his edge. When he passed the gates, elders sat in a circle with time in their voices, but he did not slow. Counsel felt like delay. Delay felt like danger. Besides, the world was moving. He could feel it rushing past like wind along the river. His tongue learned a sharper pace to match. In the evenings, he practiced speeches that cut faster than they healed. He called it clarity. He called it strength. He did not notice how the room cooled inch by inch. In a season of success, he bought a vineyard at the edge of the city, a slope with a broken wall and tangled vines. The land needed patience, and the patience felt impossible. Haste said it would be fine. Distraction said there were better things to do. He walked the rows and promised repair tomorrow. He walked the rows and promised repair again. Honey waited in jars at home, and he tasted it out of season when fatigue pressed him from the inside. The sweetness soothed for a moment and stole his sleep for a night. He told himself it was nothing. The body keeps a ledger when the mind refuses to write. His breath climbed higher. His shoulders stayed tense, even at rest. In his chest, a small tremor began to hum that no celebration could quiet. The tilted scale asked for another day and then another. The wall asked for one stone and then another. Words asked for tenderness and received heat. The field asked for watchfulness and received hurry. The merchant lived between many asks and began to feel hollow in the space where promise should have been. Storms do not always announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they arrive as a long gray season that wrings sweetness out of the air. The harvest that year tasted thin. Grapes looked full and felt empty on the tongue. Buyers did not return as quickly. Partners grew careful. At the gates, the elders still sat, and one morning he stopped because the ache had grown heavier than the rush. He stood there without a performance and said only that the fruit had lost its joy. The circle made room. No one mocked the tremor in his voice. No one asked for a speech. They spoke of weights that do not need defense, of walls that stand because someone loved them enough to lift one stone every day, of tongues that heal faster than they wound, of honey that waits for its season and becomes sweeter when it is measured, of fields that remember care. Their words were not clever, they were true. The nervous flutter in his chest softened, as if a door had opened in a room with stale air. He felt his breath drop lower. He felt the wheel in his mind slow until options appeared that panic had hidden. He walked home differently that day. The honest scale felt heavier in his hands and lighter in his spirit. He set aside the other without ceremony. He spoke to his workers without edge and discovered that respect does not require sharpness. He tasted the honey and left the jar closed with a quiet gratitude that surprised him. He carried a stone to the wall, and then another the next morning and another the morning after. No one clapped. The vines did not shout. The change moved like water under the soil where roots could drink. Through the months that followed, the vineyard learned his new cadence. Rain came and he did not chase it with noise. Sun came and he did not waste it with distraction. When conflict reached his table, he did not swing a sword with his sentences. He dressed the wound with truth that did not humiliate. The body kept a new ledger. Sleep grew thicker, shoulders released. The tremor quieted. The field seemed to mirror the man, and the man seemed to mirror the field. When harvest returned, the grapes were not louder. They were deeper. Sweetness had weight again, the kind of sweetness that lingers after the taste is gone. Buyers noticed without knowing why. Partners stood closer without being asked. At the gates, the elders smiled the way people smile when a story has found its center. The crooked scale gathered dust in a corner, and the honest scale carried its steady music into each day. The merchant walked his rows at dusk, hand along the vine, and understood at last what the warnings had been trying to give him. Not fear, freedom. Freedom from the hurry that had kept him clever and kept him small. Freedom from a mouth that proved a point and lost a person. Freedom from a pleasure that promised rest and left him tired. Freedom from a pattern that produced motion without fruit. The vineyard was not perfect, and neither was he, yet both were whole enough to receive the next season without dread. Some nights he still felt the old pull toward the quick glow and the fast story. On those nights, he stood by the rebuilt wall and listened to the stillness. He remembered the gates. He remembered the balm. He remembered the honey that waits and the scale that does not lean. The memories did not shame him. They kept him company. They were the language of a life turning toward wisdom and staying there long enough for roots to deepen. If you were to pass his field now, you would not see a miracle. You would see order. You would see care. You would taste fruit that tells the truth about the hands that tended it. And if you asked the merchant what had changed, he would answer with a quiet smile that sounded like rest. He would say that the warnings were not walls that kept him out. They were gates that led him home. There is a gentle path that does not begin with hurry. It begins with a small kindness to the truth. In a quiet room, the mind reviews a single choice about resources and notices the option that lets the soul breathe. The fast path glitters. The clean path gives rest. When the clean path is chosen, the chest loosens and the future feels a little steadier. True waits sing a soft music that helps sleep return at night. The music is not loud, it is faithful. In another hour, the day opens to conversation. A message is shaped with care and sent to a steady voice who has no need to impress. Questions carry a calm weight when they are placed in trustworthy hands. Clarity grows in the space between listening and response. The burden in the body redistributes across a table that holds it without breaking. Counsel does not erase responsibility. It widens the map so that courage lands in the right place. Later, the room changes and words begin to gather behind the teeth. Heat rises and asks for release. The mouth pauses long enough for breath to reach lower ground. A simple sentence arrives that keeps dignity intact, while truth is named. The atmosphere shifts from threat to repair. The person across the room does not become the problem. The problem remains the problem. Respect stays in the center like a lamp that refuses to go out. Desire knocks with a familiar fragrance and a promise of quick comfort. The jar of sweetness on the shelf is still within reach, and the memory of other nights stirs. The body remembers the crash that follows the thrill and chooses to wait for the right season. Gratitude rises where urgency once stood. Pleasure keeps its color because meaning holds its frame. The heart feels cared for rather than managed. Joy grows wider because it is measured. Work calls with a long, unfinished edge. Distraction offers a bright exit. Instead, a single task is given a full measure of attention. The mind enters it the way a swimmer enters clear water and remains until the shoreline arrives. Completion settles into the bones with a warmth that no applause can duplicate. The hours feel heavier in the best way. Focus returns a sense of dignity that scattered motion could not provide. The day